Welcome to Addiction and the Family, Episode 70, Finding Joy in the Divine Traumedy with Dr. Nicki Monti. Welcome to Addiction and the Family. My name is Casey Arriaga. I am a licensed clinical social worker and addiction counselor at both Windmill Wellness Ranch and Recovery Tree Counseling. I'm the author of several books, including Realistic Hope, The Family Survival Guide for Facing Alcoholism and Other Addictions, and the children's trilogy based on my book, Mommy's Getting Sober. I've been in recovery from my own addiction since 1998, and I've married to someone in recovery. The first 10 years we were in active addiction together, and since then, we've been in recovery together. Join us as we share experience, strength, and realistic hope on how you and your family can learn to grow and recover together. All right, welcome everybody. We had a great conversation with Dr. Nicki Monti. She's the author of a new book that talks about a lot of her amazing experiences before and into her recovery, and how she's used these things to help other people, which is what it's all about, right? So we're going to talk about some of that today, get into not just some of the wild, crazy stories, but really the underlying meaning and where it's opened her heart up to even more love. What a great story. Talks a lot about recovery, where as family member or the person struggling with the addiction, you too can recover. So we'll get into all of that after a quick word from one of our sponsors. Addiction in the Family is brought to you in part by Windmill Wellness Ranch, where I happen to work. We are nestled in the beautiful hill country of Texas, and we've been rated as the #1 treatment center in the United States by the Track 9 independent rating system. And that's based on our ability to bring down addiction relapse rates, anxiety, depression, and also increase optimism, increase resilience, increase people's commitment to recovery. When you see the results, that's what counts. Now, we are so confident of our ability to help people that we offer the Windmill Guarantee. The Windmill Guarantee states that if somebody comes to treatment and does all the stuff that we suggest, and then also does all the follow-up that we suggest, and still needs to come back to treatment within 1 year, they can come back at no cost. If you want to find out more about the Windmill Guarantee and everything else that we have to offer, visit windmillwellnessranch.com or call our admissions line. While I've got your attention, we also offer a free family course to anybody. You don't have to have any association with Windmill, but if you want to just get a taste of what we offer for families, sign up for a family course at windmillfamilycourse.com. You'll get weekly emails that'll point you towards podcast episodes, blog posts, videos, all kinds of resources that we offer for families. Because as you can imagine, I'm kind of passionate about family work, and I happen to run the family program at Windmill Wellness Ranch. So if you want to see more about that, go to windmillfamilycourse.com and spread the word. Again, anybody, anywhere who needs what we have to offer is free to sign up for the course and get those resources. Welcome back. All right, without further ado, let's get into that interview. We're so glad to have you on the program. Why don't you take a second and introduce yourself to our listeners and let us know, what are you doing on a show called Addiction and the Family?
Well, what am I doing on a show called Addiction and the Family? My name is Dr. Nicki Monti, and most people call me Dr. Nicki. Well, I'm excited to be here to promote and talk about and explore my new book, which is called The Divine Traumedy of Nicki Joy, a True Grime Tale, which indeed it is. There are many, many stories in the book, and those stories are bracketed to some degree. I mean, they include childhood and adulthood and college and all those good things. But many of the stories are sort of, there's a before sobriety and after sobriety. A show about addiction and the family could be another subtitle of my book. The story I was born into was a story of feeling like an interruption, an intrusion in the whole life business. And, I'm just going to have to find my way through because there's not going to be a lot of help in doing that. As with all things in life, I find that turned out to be a great deal for me because I got to find my way through and learn how to find my way through. But along the way, I was emotionally reluctant, let's say that. I was always noisy and flamboyant and all those kinds of things, but I felt really broken inside. And so what you saw was not what you got if you dug deeper. And so I dealt with that the way a lot of us who are addicts and alcoholics do, which is I did everything I could to flee the scene. I kept working hard and doing all the things, but I sure weren't going to get too close. You might think you were close, but you were never close. And for anybody who's in recovery, what we know is just because you put the plug in the jug doesn't mean you suddenly become sweet and lovely and it just doesn't. All the same behavior comes up and all the same things. So really the book, which is what I'm excited to talk about, besides all the things that go with knowing about recovery, is about going from self-loathing to self-love, which is kind of a common theme in the world. But I lived a lot of different kinds of lives, which I find a lot of alcoholics and addicts do, right? We live all these different lives, trying to find a way to fit in, trying to find a way to be important, or trying to find a way to stay invisible, whatever your deal is. And I found my way through, and I actually changed my relationship to my story, which is what healing is. It's not to change the story, it's to change the relationship to the story, right? How we feel about it, how we perceive it. So I've worked really hard to do that. I'm very excited. This is a memoir. I call it a teaching memoir. So all of the learnings, I've written some self-help books before. This is not a self-help book. This is a tell-all book. All that I tell is about me, my struggles, my discoveries, my learnings. And so everything comes to the story. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll cringe.
I love the idea of a teaching memoir. That's really beautifully put. And for a lot of people in recovery or that have been in the rooms of recovery, they'll run into that idea, right? The idea that I'm going to tell my story, but I'm not just spewing story. When people first come in recovery, they might do some of that,
Right.
whether family members, whether the person directly with the addiction or other mental health struggles, it might be just, I need to get it out. I haven't been able to talk about what's going on. In fact, a lot of
Mhm.
family members particularly deal with that because they'll be in this situation where they've been hiding what they've been going through and they've been hiding what their loved one's been going through. Now, that's not
Yes.
always true, right? Some family members will fly the flag high and you can't believe what we went through and this happened and this happened and this
Yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah.
I run a family workshop every weekend and every once in a while, a family member will come in, it's their first time, and they'll say, Casey, you're not going to believe this. And they'll look around the room, say, I'm sure we're very different from all the other families here. Like nobody else has been through what we've been through,
Yeah.
which only tells me that they haven't been talking about it. Because as soon as you start talking about it with other people in that situation, other people say, oh, yeah, me too. Yes, I know how you feel. Or even better yet, I felt that same way when we first came in. But as that progresses, those stories, not just the stories themselves, because I love what you said about the story doesn't change, but what we transmit through that story, what we're trying to say with that story, that does change. And so we'll
Right.
see that the intent,
Fingers crossed.
yeah, well, with any luck, as recovery progresses for somebody, you can see them start to have a different motivation behind telling their story. And they're no
Right.
longer
It's
just
true.
releasing pressure. And you talked about putting the plug in the jug, which is a common expression in,
Mhm.
some recovery groups. But in
Mhm.
some ways, for some people, it's like taking the plug out of the jug and letting the genie and all this stuff come out. But after a
Right.
while,
Right.
just telling a story for its own sake doesn't do much. And so I wonder if you could maybe talk about how some of that motivation changed for you and how that maybe informed how you wrote this book.
Yes. Well, so one of the themes and one of the threads is about recovery. And I use that word with great emphasis. It's a word it's not just for alcoholics and addicts, right? We very much, I believe that many, especially people from trauma drama, I came from an alcoholic family. Most people that choose alcoholism, and I'd say choose alcoholism because I use less of a medical model than some people do. I feel that change is really a matter of choice. And I've worked with so many people who make the choice to, oh, this feels great. I feel so good. I got 42 days. Oh, life is really changing for me. And the next thing I know they're in the office going, yeah, I don't know. Because change is scary. It's just scary, right? Am I going to be able to tolerate a good life? Have I confused intensity and highly dramatic situations with livingness? Because a lot of people do that. They confuse those things. But for me, of course, I was never going to be an alcoholic because my parents were alcoholics. So, of course, I wasn't going to be an alcoholic. I mean, I stole my first drugs from my mother's medicine cabinet, of course, and amphetamines and things like that. But that was for weight. That had nothing to do with addiction. And I'm what we call cross addicted. I never met, I once had carrot anemia, which is something where you actually turn jaundice looking because you eat so many carrots. Because, if one carrot is good, 40 or better. If if one blouse is good, 55 or better. And so I made all these choices along the way that were pretty dreadful, and I was in a lot of pain. And I really was my whole life a seeker. I always knew I wanted it to be different. I always knew I wanted to make my mark in the world. Well, at first I thought it was making my mark. Really, it was finding a way to be loved. That's what I was really aiming for. How am I going to be loved? How am I going to get people to see me and hear me? So I tried all the things. I meditated, I prayed, I followed different people who had great ideas about how to feel better about yourself. But I kept, in the meantime, making all these choices that were dreadful and deadly. They were interesting, but most of them were demeaning. I was one of those people that did much more damage to me than I ever did to anybody else. And so I went along, I was an actor and sort of kind of in a classroom. I was very good. And I did some I was brought up in New York. I was born in California, but brought up in New York. Brought up again is a loose term because I started boarding school when I was in second grade. And I was in sleepaway boarding school for 11 years. And that sends a message. You can't help but get that message. Now, very much later on, as with many things in my life, I realized that boarding school probably saved my life because it meant that I was very limited in the amount of time I actually spent with my alcoholic, violent parents because mostly I was at school. So it turned out to be a pretty good deal. So went along and I did for decades. I was trying this, I was trying that, I was doing all sorts of things. And I went out to California to be a famous actress because I wasn't just going to be an actress, I was a famous actress. I worked in New York to be a famous actress, but it hadn't happened yet. And I was invited to California and I went to an acting class and there I met a person, this is in 1979, who I still know. We've been through a lot. We've been through husbands and deaths and parental deaths and partner things and all sorts of things together all those years, as one does. Of course, I found the one acting class in LA where we smoked pot during the class because that's what you want to do when you're learning to act. And the thing is, it wasn't legal then, but it didn't matter. I was stoned all day long for 17 years. So we were drunk together and we were stoned together. One day she said to me, I've decided to get sober and I'm joined a 12-step program. I said, oh my God, that's so great. I am so proud of you and glad that you could do this. And I thought I could never do that. I could not imagine. I wasn't that interested in liquor, but stimulants and pot. So I said, hey, I just think that's fantastic. So I don't know how much time, maybe a few months or a couple of months passed, and I watched her getting sober, and it looked like a miracle to me. And we have two different stories about what happened. Her story is I begged her to take me to one of her meetings. My story is she dragged me to one of her meetings. And I'm sure somewhere in between is the truth. But when I first went, I thought, well, this isn't very cool. These people trying to better themselves. I liked that. So I went every Sunday, like it was some kind of a church thing or something. And I did that for a couple of months. Well, that wasn't working for me at all. There was no commitment. So I started taking it seriously and I started going every day. And then I started really, really being sober. It was not fun because all the feelings, of course, that I had been trying to tamp down just had their way with me. My first year came out in rage. It was not pretty. So all of that's in the book. And again, the book is about facing yourself, remembering and reclaiming your true voice, before all the noise, before all the breaking up and breaking down happened, whether it was visible or not visible to others, we knew. And it's about really reclaiming that organic voice and allowing yourselves to be visible, allowing ourselves to be emotional, have emotional integrity. And that was a hard step to take, to start to do that and to start to believe in myself truly, deeply. I had a lot of pretense, but to really believe in it. But when I was first sober and I went on this date, I was a couple husbands down at that point. I was beginning to date, was sober dating, and I was in this guy's apartment because, why have boundaries? I'd known him 20 minutes. Why wasn't I in his apartment? Of course I was. And he said, "Would you like to drink?" I said, "No, I don't drink." And he said, "You don't drink?" I said, "No, I don't drink." And he said, "Are you saying you never drink?" I said, "Yes, I'm saying I never drink." Now, immediately at that point, I know that I'm with an alcoholic because a regular person doesn't go on and on about it, right? This is a little hint. He said, "Okay, drugs? Do you do drugs?" I said, "No, I don't do drugs." He said, "Let me just clarify. You don't ever drink and you don't ever do drugs." He said, "Well, what do you do for fun?" I said, "For fun, I'm present in all my experiences." That was the end of the day because, like, what could she possibly mean by that? So the date was over, and then I started working on that, and I said, "Yeah, what have I been doing? I've been leaving presence my whole life. What I learned as a child. Get out. There's danger, 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 danger. There's loneliness, 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 loneliness." It never occurred to me that the solution to loneliness was being present with myself first. And then I could really give myself to others and be with others. Never occurred to me.
It's beautiful. And I can see why maybe he ran away. Because for a lot of people that have trouble around these things, being present to your experience is the scariest idea that you can propose. To say, I'm going to be with myself sounds terrifying. Over time in recovery, it can start to sound like, oh, wait, that's what I want. That's what I'm looking for. But first, we have to discover that there's something within us that we want to be present to. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of informs, rolling back a little bit with your story about your friend says that you begged to go to the first meeting and you say she dragged you. I'm saying those aren't mutually exclusive. That fits the experience of so many people looking for recovery. Like, I am desperate for help, but I'm not sure about getting help. Like, that's a scary idea, and I'm desperate for it at the same time. And it reminds me a joke that I ran across somewhere. It's an AA joke. One friend says to another, "Did you hear about Bob? Bob passed away." "He did. He was so young. He's into 30, young, promising guy, strong. What happened?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, drinking and drugs." "He's really drinking and drugs, man. Never would have thought that of Bob. What happened?" And he said, "Well, he just couldn't stop and it dragged him down and eventually it killed him." I said, "Wow. Did he ever try like AA or anything like that?" First guy said, "Well, no, it wasn't that bad. It is
Goodness
that thought."
gracious.
No, it's
It
that
is that
thought of,
thought. And I've been a therapist for, 40 years or whatever. This is what I know about these stories. And everybody wants to feel like they're unique, as you were saying at the beginning, right? That they're different. Oh, this family. Oh, you guys have probably never heard this story. I keep waiting in my office for somebody to tell me a story I've never heard it. Once in a while, I hear an angle on a story that's like, okay, that's a good one. But that's not what conjoins us. It's not what gets us together. It's the feelings underneath the stories. The details of the stories are fairly important. They can be fun. My stories are fun. I mean, there's drugs, sex, and rock and roll when I was an actor. So I had lots of dramatic agent stories and I had that's and I did all sorts of things. But really, it's the feelings, the sad, mad, glad, fearful, lusty, thrilled, whatever it is, even joyful feelings. But none of them are out there. All of the feelings are in here. And then so we share sadness or we share gladness or we share fear. And that's what brings us together, right? But we have to know how that works in us. And I have certainly known a lot of sober people that you would never believe they're sober because they're not living a conscious life at all. They're just doing all the things they did, but now they're not drunk or stoned doing them. So I really feel that the 12 steps, a lot of different kinds of addiction programs, are meant to be a foundation, kind of a roadmap, and it's to be lived out in the world. And if you stop following the roadmap or looking at why do I make these choices, I think it's important to really dig deep and say, what initiated this idea that this is my solution? You and I know it's a short-term solution for a long-term problem, right? But what initiated that solution is what's going to end up giving us the possibility of changing our relationship to that original story. What did we get out of that story? I have a very clear understanding of the patterns I've lived based on the story I told myself about what happened early on. The stories I told myself, I made it up. Just because my father left when I was 4 doesn't mean he left me because I wasn't enough to be loved by him. It meant he left because he needed to leave for his reasons. It had nothing to do with me whatsoever. And to come to realize that rather than to make up this story, my mother sent me to boarding school, not because there was something wrong with me. I was 7, but because that's was her decision about what she needed to do to make her life work. It wasn't because I wasn't good enough to stay and be loved. But my decision was I wasn't good enough to stay and be loved by either of those people. So I started building defenses around that idea and then perpetuated that original idea over and over. Found people who couldn't love me and would abandon me. And so we find confirmation. And once we really get that, we can begin to work from the inside out. And not drinking, not drugging, not gambling, not sexing compulsively, not eating compulsively, whatever form of addiction we have, not doing those things is the hello. As I say, it's the gate, it's not the garden. Opening the gate and stepping into the garden is when the work begins.
I love that perspective because that's something that I do try and transmit to my clients and their families and anybody that will listen. It's not what happened to you, it's how you interpret it. And if you don't resolve it, you're going to replay it. You're going to relive it. You're going to find a way to recreate your trauma. I speculate that people do it because A, it's what we know. B, I know what to do in this situation. I'm not sure what to do in some other situation. And
Yeah,
C,
yeah.
I think I'll just speak to my own childhood trauma, the abandonment stuff, the abuse, etc. My thought, I think later was partly maybe I'll get it right this time. Maybe
Yeah.
this time I can get him to love me, or this time I'll get her to keep me around, or whatever. But of
Yeah.
course, I'm not going to pick somebody who's just going to keep me around because I wouldn't know what to do with that person. So I'm going
Yeah.
to subconsciously pick somebody who's
Yeah.
going to abandon me, or
Yeah.
that I believe I can keep under my sway and control so they won't, whatever it is that comes up. And I also appreciate your recognition of like how many different ways it come out, food, sex, love, shopping, gambling, whatever it is. It may look like a drug, including alcohol, and it may be something completely different, which was funny. I had kind of a chuckle inside when you were telling the story, like, the gentleman whose apartment you were after, knowing him for 20 minutes. And he says, we don't drink, you don't drug. What do you do for fun? One thing that crosses his mind, I don't know. I show up in strange men's apartment after 20 minutes. That's what I'm doing. But your answer was so much more beautiful.
There was
Is that
that part.
actually, yeah, I am present to my experiences, and being able
Yes.
to do that becomes the gift of life.
I think we're born whole. I don't think we're a tabula rasa. I think we come in with a soul that has some opinions or ideas or directions or instincts, but I think we're born whole with all the pieces in place, so to speak. And then we start throwing pieces away because you don't want to be too loud for your family. You don't want to be too soft for your family. You don't want to be whatever it is, right? And then, well, there's that daddy stuff, and oh, there's that mommy stuff. So then we go and we find people who, yes, maybe we can get it right with daddy this time or mommy this time, instead of dealing with how those voices live inside of us, change our relationship to the inside father, the inside mother, and the inside child we used to be. And I have this one alcoholic that I work with, and every time I say something like that, he goes, well, it's not so easy. And I keep saying to him, dude, I'm 43 years of sobriety. I am well aware that it is not that easy. takes commitment and work. If you committed as much to sobriety as you commit to cocaine, we'd be in good shape here. Just take that ability to commit and go down a different road with it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I love the acknowledgement. It's heavy lifting. You know, the kind of work that
Yes,
we
it's
do. I work at an amazing treatment center and I do my own outpatient practice. And in both settings, I'll tell people, I am not going to waste your time by asking you to do easy things. You can do easy things at home. You can do easy things for free. You don't need my help to do easy things. Let's talk about the difficult things. But you know what's harder than doing that work is not doing that work. That ends up being much harder.
I know. It's the thing I say on the other side, you're going to realize how much agonizingly difficult work you've put into staying discontent, unhappy with yourself, unhappy with the world, blaming and shaming others and yourself. I mean, it's just, there's so much noise in your head that it's amazing you're ambulatory. I do a lot of group work, which is interesting because you always look sort of two-faced in group work, right? I'm so gentle with that person and just all over that person because she needs me to be gentle and she needs me to be tough as nails with her because that's the way it is with group work if it's a good group. So anyway, they'll come in and they'll go, oh, I was so mad at you last week or 2 weeks ago. And I always say, take a number. If I'm doing my work, you're going to be mad at me at some point because I'm not going to just go, oh, baby, how's that feel? I might say, when you're really deep inside your feelings, how is that feeling for you right now? What's going on with you? Let's describe it. Let's get into it. Let's dive. Let's dive deep. But, I'm not ChatGPT. I'm not going to go, it's a great question. So glad you asked that question.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I was told early on in my career that if you can't stand people hating you, you can't do this work. Because at the treatment center where I work, we use some really sophisticated data tracking. So every week somebody takes the PHQ, they're taking the GAD, we're measuring their commitment to recovery, we're measuring their cravings, all these kinds of things. You can see how they correlate, track nine. It's an amazing system. And we'll show the results to the clients. And sometimes they'll say like, oh, wow, no, I didn't realize I was feeling that way. And I say, well, let's look inside. Because so many people in early recovery and prior to recovery are shutting themselves off. They'll say, oh, I have no idea what I feel. Or my favorite, they'll say, I feel numb. I'll say, really?
Yeah.
You know what numbness
Yeah.
is? It's an overload of emotion. It's not a lack of emotion. Your brain is on
Yes.
overload. You don't know what to
Yes,
do with all that
yes.
feeling. And so you're shutting it down. And family members will come in saying the same thing. They are not touching a drug of any kind. And they're like,
Yeah.
I am totally numbed out all the time. I said, let's talk about what you're feeling. Well, I don't know what I'm feeling. Well, you know something. You're feeling a lot of fear. Let's talk about what's going on inside your body, just what you were describing there. And that idea of being able to look and see what's really happening. And sometimes it's that objective data that you can show someone. Sometimes it's just saying, stop, take a breath. What's happening kind of nose to navel from like right on the top of your nose down to your belly button. What's happening there? That's not all the emotion, but there's plenty of information. What's happening there? People say, I have no idea. We'll take a second and check. Well, my throat's kind of, well, what's your heart feeling? Well, yeah, it's kind of racing. I said, if I told you my throat was tight and my heart was racing, what would you say? Is that you'd probably be pretty anxious. Oh, check that out. Okay. I had a client not that long ago say, I have anxiety. I had no idea. Well, that might be one little piece of why it is that you keep taking alcohol and pouring it into your body. We use this to disinfect things for a reason, but people pour it in their mouth, right?
Which is so the worst idea for anxiety. But anyway, it only increases the anxiety on the other side of it. One of my favorite things to say with clients is, well, they'll say, I don't know. If you did know, what would the answer be? And then they answer me.
I love that.
Because there's a part of us that doesn't know or is scared to say, because what if it's wrong and teacher will be, whatever. Or mommy, you'll get mad at me.
Or afraid to know.
Or afraid to know. Because they have to step into their adulthood. Most people think that's a terrible thing. It means towards an ultimate state of being. How bad can that be? Well, you know what? We have a lot more choices with adulthood than we ever did when we were kids. And yet people hold on to it. There's a lot to be said about that. But one of the things that my third husband, I was married to 33 and a half years before he died. And he was sober I'm going to say 55 years. It did not mean he was sane. I met him when he was 20 years sober. I was 5 years sober, and he had never done therapy. And may I say, you really needed therapy. Eventually he did a little bit of it. It's really interesting to see what happens to people, how they keep being run by the old demons. It's really great that he wasn't because he was a dreadful drunk. He was the kind of drunk that would drive through a wall. I'll just drive through the wall to get into the bar. He was just outrageous. I did obviously know him as sober for a long time, but it's really interesting to, as you do, work with people to go underneath that numbing out period, right? And to watch them wake up and the fear that goes with that, but also the discovery that we have these brilliant glimpses, but real glimpses, not the drunken, I had the best idea last night. I wrote it down. Let me see if I can find it. And then you look at it and it's like, change the pillows or something. But the real, when you're sober, these glimpses into the radiance that we all carry and how we can connect through that radiance, or the humanity that we are able to feel, that we get, not sloppy sadness, the real deep humanity we can feel when we're walking through the world in any degree conscious. It's a whole different world. Life is such a gift. It's such a gift. And I don't know about you, but I think I spend a good half of my time, if not more, trying to encourage people to realize what a gift life is. And then if we spend any time throwing it away, we are spitting in the eye of whatever you think has happened to create this thing.
Okay, that seems like a good place to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll hear the rest of our interview with Dr. Nicki. Among our sponsors, the most important one is you. We're just so grateful for your support on our mission of helping families find recovery. Here are some ways you can help. If you know anyone who could benefit from our message, encourage them to listen and subscribe. Hit that like button. We are so grateful for all of our subscribers on Patreon. So if you are able to support us in that way, we are so incredibly grateful for you. You can also check out any of my books. We've got Realistic Hope, Family Survival Guide for Facing Alcoholism and Other Addictions. We have the trilogy based around my book, Mommy's Getting Sober. Those are children's books, which are great to spread that message. And each one of the books also includes a guide on how to talk to kids about addiction. And also have my book, Spirituality for People Who Hate Spirituality. Please tell a friend, spread the word on social media. Let us know what we can do to help. Feel free to reach out to us. We appreciate each and every one of you. We could not do this without you. And looking and seeing the gift of consciousness, the gift of awareness that originally feels like a threat, and how it is. I mean, look how those things swap places, right? So initially, our means of escape looks like a gift, and eventually that looks like a threat. And then being truly conscious, being aware, starts off looking like a threat and ends up being a gift. And what an incredible change that is when we say recovery, right? Recovering who we are. And I love what you were talking about, like throwing away pieces or burying things. I tell people, well, the good news and the bad news is you've never lost who you are. Because they'll say, oh, I'm a whole new person, or I'm going to recovery. This is, Casey 2.0. I said, I hate to break it to you. You're going to be the same person, but here's the good news. You never lost the first person. There's increasing research to confirm something that many of us suspected for a long time. We started making decisions in the womb. Before we're born, we're already making decisions. Our mother's heartbeat, her breathing, our genetics are all going to combine. So by the time we're born, yeah, we have a personality. We have some idea. And I think for most of us, the hope is I'm going to get to be me. And it's really going to work out. And then we have experiences. And as you put it beautifully, it's not that it's decided for us. We decide, well, maybe that's not going to work out. Plan A, being myself, that's obviously a hunch starter. We'll go to plan B, C, D, E, F, G, whatever, till we find something. We're like, okay, this is working. And so recovery is often the journey back home to say, how do I get back to plan A? What if I could be myself and let that be enough? Not because somebody else told me it was enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that the opposite of remembering is dismembering, not forgetting. So we dismember ourselves. Our job is to remember ourselves, to put ourselves back together again, to use the kintsugi method, which is the Japanese bowls, when they're broken, they put them back together with veins of gold. So that in the end, we've put ourselves back together with veins of gold, with new knowledge and new vision and a new version of us, the deeper us, the better us, higher us. Which doesn't mean that we're not bitchy some of the time, or stupid some of the time, or mean, or whatever it is. We are still human, and it's our humanity that saves us. And however, now that we have these veins of gold, we are more precious than we were to begin with. We're not just useful like the bowl was in the first place. We're useful and beautiful and precious and worthwhile.
Mm.
So,
Absolutely love that. And yes, kintsugi is something that is an imagery that I love and transmit with clients. So I love that you are also using that and that people can start to see that beauty within themselves and
yeah,
recognize. And you mentioned being an author of several books. I am as well. And I'm working on my next book, which is about all of the gifts we get that we would never have gotten if we didn't have trouble in the first place. If we didn't
that's
have an
right.
addiction, I don't think I
Exactly.
ever would have been motivated to work on all this stuff. I would have been
Oh,
content to sort of cruise down the middle and I would have missed out on so much and not just, like you said, the wild
absolutely.
stories and I can't believe I did
Mhm,
this, but the beauty that I get to live now and the conscious that I'm inspired to find that I don't know that
mhm.
I would have bothered to do before. Yay for the trouble.
I agree with you, Casey. I agree
So,
with you. It's delightful to have this kind of a conversation. We're like-minded, but I also think that we're like-knowledged and like-feelinged.
ooh, I like
I've been around a minute more than you, but there's a connectivity that comes through true conversation. True conversation. I don't care if you're
yeah.
on a radio show or you're in Zoom or you're sitting in a coffee shop, whatever it is, there is the connectivity that we can reach through and travel time and space really in this wonderful way. That one of the great things about the modern world, and sounds like I just got out of my buggy, but it really is one of the wonderful things. There's several things not so wonderful about it, but this is lovely. And we both have blue in our hair, so how bad
Yeah.
could it
How,
be?
how bad can it be? Well, there's a beautiful thing that I ran into one time. It was actually when I went to my graduation for my master's degree. I stopped by a recovery meeting. And I was coming in from out of town, and this other guy was coming in from out of town, and the people at the local meeting had never heard our story. So, like, hey, we want to hear from both of you. So we said, okay, great. And he and I started chatting. We recognized some things we had in common. And he says, isn't it great? When you go to meet other people in recovery, it's the only place where you can go and meet complete strangers and start immediately reminiscing. It's
Hmm,
one of the many gifts of my addiction, my recovery, and of all the
yeah,
beautiful things that have come from it. So we're going to
yeah,
start moving towards wrapping up. And
right.
what I'd like to do is just give you an opportunity to sort of say any last things you'd want to say for people who might be considering recovery, for family members who are not sure what happens next. Anything you'd want to say to all of them?
What I always think about when I'm working with people who are newly in recovery or considering it is you can always take back your addiction. Give life a chance to surprise you. Because I think the best things in life come from surprise or are within a surprise. Give yourself a chance to be a better version of yourself. I think it's helpful to have people who've been there, done that, and can safely guide you through. Give yourselves a chance. And what is the worst that could happen? What is the very worst that could happen? You won't die from sobriety, but you might die from not being sober. So that's one thing. The other thing, on a very personal note, I really think this is the best work I've ever done. The Divine Traumedy of Nikki Joy, True Crime Tales, the best work I've ever done. I'm very proud of it. I'm very excited by it. And I hoping that it's going to touch a lot of people. One of my clients read it. I've known her for a long time. And she read it and said, you always used to say, Dr. Nikki, I know what you're going through. I know what you're feeling. And you give me little snippets of your life and this. And I think, yeah, well, whatever. She knows. She said, I read the book and she said, you really know. I said, I know. That's what I've been saying. So I think it's great to see somebody who's really come through to the other side. This is the last chapter of my life. I'm not under any delusions. My partner and I know that. Since my husband died, I repartnered with somebody whose wife had died, and it is the best and most happiest time of my life. The happiest time of my life is now, is today. And I'm a cautionary tale for people who think you can't find love late. You know, my husband loved me very much. I had one foot out the door for 33 and a half years until he was dying. And then I left aside all expectations of him becoming the man he was supposed to be. And I just was in service to him for 18 months. And it was brilliant. It changed my DNA. You know, discovered a long time ago I was born to serve. That's my soul's purpose. And this was a very personal version of that. And it was amazing. It woke me up to yet another piece of me. And that piece allowed me to fall fully into love with no reservation. I'm excited and about life. I've always been excited about life, but now I feel the love I thought, and I feel life's grace every day, which again doesn't mean I don't grouse and gripe and do what everybody else does. But I feel graced and glad to be here with you today.
As I am with you, that is so just gorgeous, the way you talk about it and the idea of like it just, everything has the potential, especially in recovery, to keep getting better. And I've yet to see an upper limit. I haven't had anyone come back and say, well, I kept working on my recovery, I kept working on myself, and I kind of hit this plateau and it never got any better than that. I don't hear that. It always has the potential to get even better than that and more amazing than we would have dared dream. Thank you so much for being with us. Take a moment and just let our audience know, where do they find you? Where do they find your book? If someone wanted to get in contact with you, what would they do?
The book is available, and there's an audiobook, which I read myself, and it's quite, it was interesting to relive it while I was reading it. So there's tears and cheers in it. Probably the easiest way at this point is to go to my website, www.stucknomore.com/books. And then you'll see my author's page with all the information. Of course, it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and audiobook and all the things. So it's in paperback, hardcover, audio, ebook, Kindle. And it's a hard title to forget, sort of, The Divine Traumedy, which tells the story of Nicki Joy, and that would be me. A true crime tale. So I hope that people will read it. And if you haven't read it yet, I hope you'll read it and I get to come back and talk about it again.
I would love to have you back sometime. This is such a beautiful interview. And just one last thing that I'll touch on. You had mentioned it earlier, the idea that the hope for the book is that it helps people. And, you know, most people say, well, I want my business to thrive, to, again, justify things to my dad who passed away 30 years ago or whatever it is. And I had this realization. Yeah, I was talking about it with a business recovery group that I'm part of. I was on with them this morning and talking about the idea that a successful business is one that serves its purpose of helping people. And if I can find a sense of serenity and abundance, fantastic. But more important to me, that it's serving my higher power as well and that it's helping others. So I love hearing that kindred spirit in you as well.
You'll have to read it and let me know if that happens for you.
I love it. All righty. Well, thank you so much for being on the program, and I hope we'll talk soon.
I hope so.
All right. Was that not an amazing interview? All right. So go check her book out and then also stick around for the credits because we got lots of cool information. See you next time. Thanks for tuning into this episode of Addiction and the Family. This program is recorded, produced, written, floor swept, the whole bit by myself and my wife, Kira. Just so happy to have you with us. If you'd like, you can always look us up on Facebook. We are tweeting on Twitter, whatever they're calling it these days. And we can be found on Instagram. We can be found on Blue Sky. We can be found on Pinterest. So visit caseyauthor.com and just know that we are so appreciative of you and your support. Hit that like and subscribe. Let us know what you think. Feel free to email us anytime at addictionandthefamily@gmail.com. Take care till next time.